The sky darkened as clouds gathered like silent spectators. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying an uneasy chill. She stood by the window, staring at the old roof of the house across the street. Raindrops began to fall, timid at first, tapping against the shingles. The sound was soft, almost comforting, but something about it made her uneasy. Each drop hit with a suddenness that made the roof seem alive. The air smelled of wet earth and something older, forgotten. A faint creak echoed from the eaves, as though the house itself was breathing. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, feeling a shiver race through her. Lightning flickered, illuminating shadows that moved unnaturally across the walls. A gust of wind rattled the window, and the rain intensified, drumming with a fierce urgency. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the raindrops, faster, louder, impossible to ignore. She noticed a shadow on the roof, shifting against the flow of water. It was not the shadow of a tree or a bird. It moved with intent, deliberate, silent. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized it was watching her. The rain poured harder, masking the sound of something scraping against the shingles. A metallic scent filled the room, sharp and unexpected. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The shadow crept closer to the edge, and she could make out its outline now. It resembled a figure, distorted and ragged, as though stitched together from the darkness itself. The wind howled, forcing the rain sideways into her face as she leaned closer to the window. A sudden crack split the air, the roof groaning under the weight of something unseen. Her pulse thundered in her ears, and she could not look away. The figure raised a hand, slow and deliberate, pointing directly at her. A chill crawled up her spine, paralyzing her senses. The rain hissed as it hit the roof, a symphony of warning she could not escape. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound froze in her throat. Lightning illuminated the figure completely, revealing hollow eyes that bore into her very soul. It smiled, not a friendly smile, but one that promised dread and revelation. The wind slammed the window open with a violent force, and the figure moved closer. She stumbled backward, tripping over a chair, heart hammering in terror. The rain poured through the gaps in the old roof, soaking the floor, creating puddles that reflected the shadow. Her eyes flicked to the reflection, and she saw it move independently, inching closer despite the figure on the roof not changing position. The room felt smaller, walls bending inward, the air heavy with fear. She backed into the corner, eyes locked on the window, waiting for the inevitable. The shadow rose above the roof, taller, stretching impossibly, casting a darkness that swallowed the street. A scream clawed at her throat, but it was silenced by the roar of the storm. The raindrops fell harder now, like a barrage, striking the roof as if angered by her presence. Something touched her shoulder, cold and heavy, but when she spun around, no one was there. The reflection in the puddles wreathed, twisting into shapes she could not comprehend. She felt herself slipping, the floor tilting, the walls closing in with every beat of her heart. And then she heard a whisper, soft and terrible, calling her name from the roof. It was a voice she knew, yet distorted beyond recognition, demanding attention, demanding her to look. The storm raged, but the whisper cut through, sharper than the wind or the rain. She tried to resist, tried to tear her gaze from the window, but the pull was irresistible. The shadow leaned closer, and the last drop of her courage fell like a raindrop onto the old roof. Her legs trembled, refusing to obey her commands to run. The whisper grew louder, a twisted melody threading through the storm. It came again, repeating her name with a tone that made her skin crawl. Her eyes remained fixed on the figure, which now seemed to shimmer in the rain, edges blurring like it was not entirely solid. Lightning split the sky, and for a heartbeat, she could see the roof clearly, tiles broken, moss creeping, water spilling through cracks, and the figure perched among them, impossible and unreal. Then darkness swallowed it again, leaving only the whisper lingering in her ears. She pressed her palms to the glass, desperate to keep the world at bay. A sudden movement caught her attention. One of the roof tiles slid sideways, revealing a hollow blackness beneath. From the hollow emerged a hand, skeletal and dripping wet, reaching toward her as though sensing her fear. Her breath caught, lungs tightening, chest heaving. Another hand followed, then a face, pale and twisted, with eyes that seemed to see into her memories, into the deepest corners of her mind. The rain blurred her vision, mixing with the sweat of terror on her forehead. She stumbled backward, tripping over the wet rug, hands scrambling to find something, anything, to defend herself. The whisper grew louder still, now echoing in her head rather than in the room. It repeated not only her name, but memories she thought buried, her first mistake, the secret she never told, the shame she carried in silence. The shadow on the roof leaned forward, tilting in ways that should have been impossible. The wind slammed the window open again, rattling the panes violently, and she felt a cold breath sweep across her neck. She spun around, expecting to see someone behind her, but the room remained empty. The puddles on the floor shimmered, and the reflections in them began to distort, shapes forming that had no right to exist. They twisted into faces, screaming silently, eyes wide, mouths open, reaching toward her. A flash of lightning revealed the roof again, and the figure was gone, replaced by dozens of smaller shadows crawling over the tiles, moving as if alive. A sudden, sharp crack echoed, louder than thunder, and the roof shuddered under the force of some unseen weight. Her heart slammed against her ribs as the storm outside roared like a beast awakened. The whisper became a chorus, voices layered, overlapping, speaking in tongues she did not recognize. Yet she understood every word. They were accusing her, demanding something she could not comprehend, promising a reckoning she could not escape. The shadows on the roof coalesced, forming a shape taller than the house itself, stretching into the sky, blotting out the clouds. She backed into the corner, shivering, drenched, and unable to take her eyes off it. Then the rain stopped, abruptly, leaving the world eerily silent except for the whisper, which now came from inside her head. She could feel it crawling beneath her skin, probing, examining, judging. Her reflection in the puddle rose without her moving, mimicking her perfectly, but its eyes were black voids, staring, unblinking. A chill ran through her spine, sharper than any storm wind, and she realized she could not look away from the window, could not escape the pull of the roof, the figure, the shadow. Lightning flickered one last time, and the roof appeared again, closer than before. The figure leaned over the edge, hand outstretched, not toward the ground, but toward her very chest. The air thickened, each breath a labor, the room shrinking as though it was alive, intent on crushing her into the floor. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The whisper had swallowed her voice, leaving only the echo of fear. Her reflection moved independently, stepping closer to the window, reaching toward the figure outside. She wanted to step back, to break the spell, but her body refused to respond. The figure's face became clearer now, and horror struck her fully. It was her own face, distorted and twisted, a mirror of fear and regret. The shadow smiled, and the whisper became her own voice, speaking words she had never said aloud. Memories she had hidden surged forward, moments of shame, betrayal, guilt, and loss. The figure rose higher, hovering above the roof, impossibly large, stretching into the night sky. Her reflection lunged at her from the puddle, hands gripping at her, pulling, dragging her toward the window, toward the storm. The air grew icy, the room darker, and she felt herself slipping into something vast and infinite. The rain began again, not outside, but around her, inside her very mind, each drop a memory, each splash a scream. The whisper became louder, now a roar, echoing from the roof, the walls, her chest, her head, until she felt herself fracturing. The figure on the roof tilted, leaning forward, impossibly close. Her reflection screamed silently in the puddle, hands reaching through the glass, through the air, pulling at her very essence. The storm reached a crescendo, and she felt the pull of it, as if the world itself was unraveling around her. She could not move, could not breathe, could not even close her eyes. The figure smiled again, impossibly wide, and the whisper became a command. Step forward. And in that instant, the world tilted entirely, the storm and the whisper and the figure on the roof merging into one, and she felt herself being drawn toward it, toward the raindrops kissing the old roof, toward something she could never escape. Her body was suspended between fear and motion, pulled toward the window, toward the storm, toward the figure that mirrored her every thought. And then, as suddenly as it began, the wind stopped. The rain ceased, leaving only a quiet dripping from the eaves, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. The shadows on the roof scattered, dissolving into the night. The whisper faded, leaving an unbearable silence in its place. She blinked and found herself alone, the room still, the puddles on the floor reflecting only her own trembling face. The figure was gone, Her reflection stared back at her normally, eyes wide, alive, human once more. Her chest heaved, lungs working, body shaking from the storm that had passed. Cautiously, she stepped away from the window, grounding herself in the familiar weight of the floor beneath her feet. Outside, the rain left the world washed clean, droplets glistening on leaves and rooftops, a quiet serenity after chaos. The old roof across the street seemed ordinary now, still and unmoving, bearing no trace of the night's terror. She sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The storm had been real, yet unreal, a mirror of her own fear and regrets made tangible. A part of her still expected the whisper to return, the shadow to rise again, but the night remained silent. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, light spilling across the rooftops, she understood something profound. Fear had been a doorway, and she had survived its pull. She rose slowly, brushing rainwater and trembling from her clothes. The memory of the figure on the roof remained, a shadow etched into her mind, but it no longer controlled her. She stepped to the window one last time, watching the raindrops glisten on the shingles, quiet, unthreatening. The old roof had kissed the rain and released her, and with a deep, steadying breath, she turned from the window, leaving the storm behind, carrying the knowledge that the night's terror had not broken her, it had made her stronger. The house was silent now, the echoes of the storm fading into memory, and for the first time, she felt the weight of peace settle over her heart. She knew the shadows might return someday, in some form, but she also knew she would meet them without fear. The world outside was calm, wet, and alive, and she stepped into it with a courage she had never known before. The raindrops had kissed the old roof, and in their rhythm, she had found her own strength.